Welcome to Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show, brought to you by True North.
Hello and welcome to you all, Canada's most irreverent talk show here. This is the Andrew Lawton Show on True North on this Monday, July 15th, 2024. I am going to tell you right off the bat, this is going to be a slightly less irreverent show. In fact, I'd say considerably less irreverent show than you're used to, given what happened over the weekend. Now, I'm assuming you know precisely what I'm talking about, the attempted assassination of a presidential candidate, of a former president of the United States, of Donald Trump. Now, let me just be first and foremost upfront about this, that we don't typically cover American politics on this show. And it's not for lack of interest. I love American politics. My entry into politics was really covering or being interested in a lot of what was happening in the U.S. But simply put, as a country of 300 and some odd million, there are no shortage of people in that large group willing to share their opinions about what's happening in their country. So we focus on the things we can do better than most of them, which is talking about what's happening in Canada. But some things transcend the border in a way that you can't quite confine to any country. And that is what happened on the weekend, in my view. Now, let me just first and foremost say how grateful I am that the assassination attempt was unsuccessful, how grateful I am that that slight tilt of the head seemed to save Donald Trump's life. Not because I'm a registered Republican. I'm not American citizen. Not because I have skin in the game as a voter in the U.S., but simply put, this is not how we solve our differences. And my dismay and disgust with this would be equal whether it was Joe Biden or Donald Trump or George Bush or anyone else, as it should be for any of you. And I'm distinctly aware of how different some people are prepared to treat it when it's someone they've decided is a quote-unquote bad guy. The litany of professors and academics and media types that have been equivocating, that have been saying, oh, I wish the shooter had better aim, or saying things like, okay, well, yes, I don't like assassination attempts, but as though there is a moral difference in whether someone deserves to die based on whether you agree or disagree with their politics. We're going to be speaking with former presidential candidate Michele Bachmann in just a few moments. I'm also going to share some more of my own thoughts on this. But I just wanted to first and foremost get a sense of, I did something else first and foremost a few moments ago. So this is second most. But I wanted to just get a sense of the atmosphere on the ground. As it happened, True North had a reporter there, I believe the only Canadian journalist to be reporting from the scene of this rally. At first, she went down there just expecting this to be a regular Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, and it quickly became one of the most significant moments in United States political history. Rachel Parker is the host of Rachel and the Republic at True North. Rachel, good to be with you. Glad you're safe and okay. I know it was quite an eventful weekend for you, but let me just first ask you about why you were there, because I know that you've launched this new show, and I mentioned we typically don't cover American politics. Why were you there, and why have you taken on this campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the American election is very relevant to Canada. I think there's a lot of Canadians who are interested in the outcome of that. I think it's probably one of the most important American elections that we've seen. There's such a great chasm and divide in America right now, and I think everyone's really been watching to see what will happen there. We've seen the left in the States go after Donald Trump from every single angle that they can with this litany of litigation that they've thrown at him, and everything has been just really unsuccessful, and it's actually caused him to increase in the polls. You know, of course, we can talk about the policies that he would implement and how that would impact Canada, like things on immigration. You know, we know he's going to tighten measures at the southern border where there is just a flood of illegal immigrants entering the States right now. Those types of policies, we're going to see an impact on Canada, as well as his plans to implement tariffs. You know, those are all things that will directly impact Canadians' economy. But I think, honestly, this election is just something that Canadians care about because we've been watching the situation in the States and because our economies are so closely intertwined. We don't even necessarily need to come at it from all the ties that we have with America. It's just an election that is of interest to the world. We've seen what has happened under Joe Biden. We've never seen so much war in the Middle East under Donald Trump. And it seems like things are just declining all around the world as our superpower just to the south of us has seen such a decline under Joe Biden. So certainly this election is something that is is of such interest to the world and to Canadians. And so I've just had such an interest in American politics my whole life. I was very excited when I got the okay to cover it for True North. And I decided to go down to this Butler, Pennsylvania rally. As it happens, I was looking at Donald Trump's schedule and I thought, okay, what's kind of close by? Well, I'm in Ontario. Maybe there's some events that I could go to. There was only 2 rallies scheduled on his page when I went to look. One of them was in Florida and one of them was in Pennsylvania. So I thought, oh, Pennsylvania is probably not too far. I looked, it was just over 4 hours. I thought to myself, that's very doable for a day trip there and back. And so I began to make preparations to go down to that rally. I was going to talk to Americans about, what they thought about the election so far, why they were voting for Donald Trump, which of his policies they were most interested in, what they thought about Joe Biden, if they thought he would resign. And we did all those interviews in the hours before that assassination attempt. And obviously the event.
Yeah, let's stop there though, and let's actually take this chronologically, because I've never been to a Trump rally. I've been to political events. I was at the Republican convention in 2016 when Trump was nominated, so I have a sense of the atmosphere there. But what was the atmosphere like? What was it like? What were the people saying when you were talking to them before anyone knew that this would be a tremendously fateful day?
I think the rally was very upbeat. It was an insane, political rally. I've never been to a political event of such magnitude. We just don't have those types of events here in Canada. We don't have as many people show up to those events. I know that Pierre Poilievre is able to attract, an audience often in the thousands, but I mean, there was probably around somewhere from 15 to 20,000 people there that day. There were so many people trickling in. I just couldn't believe how many people took time out of their day and drove down for this rally. And everyone was very excited to be there. Everyone was very excited about Trump's presidency. I think people were feeling and still are feeling very confident that he's going to win on November 5th. We heard a lot of similar themes. People are very concerned about inflation these days, just like they are here in Canada. A lot of people commented on the border crisis. They said, I'm voting for Trump because of his border policies. I would like to see mass deportations of the illegal aliens that are coming into our country under Joe Biden. Some very similar themes. Some people even talked about abortion and said, we just don't like what's happening under Joe Biden. So, a lot of commonalities, some of the similar issues that we're seeing here in Canada, but very up. It was felt like 34 degrees Celsius that day. Like I personally saw a couple people pass out, and I'm just one person in a crowd of tens of thousands. If I personally see a couple people pass out, there was probably well over 100 people that passed out from the heat. But people were so eager to come out and to show their support and appreciation for Donald Trump, given everything that the left in America has thrown at this man, and he's still standing. And they really feel like he's our voice, and he's standing up for us in a way that no one has in a very, very long time in American political history.
He takes the stage, and in the moments when the shooting happened, what was going through your mind? What was apparent? Because when you listen to the audio from afar, I know what gunshots sound like. I'm a gun owner, but you can't be definitive. Was this a balloon popping? Was it an air gun? Was it how quickly and how instantly did you know, and did people on the ground know, oh my goodness, something is happening here?
My immediate instinct was that it was a shooting and that they were bullets. And I would say that was the immediate instinct of pretty much everyone in the crowd, because everyone drops to their knees and gets low. You hear a couple people yelling, a couple people screaming. So my initial instinct was that this is a shooting. And then, of course, you look on the stage and you see the Secret Service rushing, and they've now, they jumped on the president as they're supposed to. They're using their bodies to act as a shield against any incoming bullets, which is, of course, an incredible act of bravery. I mean, we can divorce the discussion about the security issues that went on that day, but that is an insane act of bravery to run into gunfire to protect someone else, which is of course their job. And then something happened, because you see the Secret Service agents, they're on the stage, they're all in a pile, and no one really moves for a couple seconds. And in that moment, I honestly thought to myself that I thought maybe that Trump had been hit and that he was dead, because I couldn't understand why the Secret Service agents weren't rushing him away if there was just not a lifeless body underneath them. And my understanding of their protocol was that if there's an emergency, immediately rush him, get him to safety, get him out of that crowd. You don't know if there's going to be more than one shooter in an event like that. The first shooter maybe is just a distraction. So the fact that nothing really happened in those first few seconds, to me, indicated that there was something seriously wrong. Now, of course, we know
you assume the worst, of course. Yes. And then so then he gets up, and we've all seen, actually, Sean, put it up on the screen. We've all seen this just legendary photo from the Associated Press photojournalist Evan Vucci. This photo that just will go down in world history, American history, of Trump, blood still on the side of his face, raising his fist, American flag, Secret Service. It's got everything. It's a beautiful photograph itself. It's composed perfectly, but the symbolism there is a moment. Explain, if you can, the vibe in the crowd, because you have in the span of seconds here, panic, fear, chaos, and then cheering and celebrating and chanting.
So I think everyone in the crowd in those initial moments were wondering the same thing that I was wondering, is if he had been hit in the head. And then we see him rise to his feet and he sort of reaches through his Secret Service agents. There's been some discussion that lady in the front wasn't even tall enough to cover him. But he reaches through them and he raises his fist and he starts pumping it and chanting, "Fight, fight, fight." And the crowd responded in kind. They began cheering and applauding and just starting to chant USA, USA. And in that moment, you could sort of feel the relief wash over the crowd and the excitement and just the hopefulness that he was still there. And then the president is whisked away and the tone of the crowd immediately changes again, with, I would say, hundreds of people in the crowd turning around and looking back at the media booth where I was positioned and pointing their fingers at the major outlooks that had their cameras positioned there and just starting to yell, "Shame, shame, this is your fault." And I even posted one of those videos, and you can just see, if you're looking over the sea of thousands of people, you can see hundreds of people raise their arms into the sky and start shaking it at the media. And there was such visceral anger for the media in that moment. And I even went and tried to go up to a couple people and to see, if they would talk to me about how they were feeling in that moment. Because I was in the media booth, they said, we don't want to speak to you. We don't want to give you any comment. You don't want to hear what we have to say anyways. And of course, I was able to get interviews later on in the day. But in that moment, it was such visceral anger directed directly towards the American media.
Interesting. Well, glad you're okay. Glad you were there to report on this for us and see it for yourself. But also glad that, again, it had the outcome it did for President Trump. But I also don't want to gloss over the fact that there was a man who lost his life, and there were casualties in this, and that's tragic. And we send our thoughts and prayers to them as well. I know you'll have a full breakdown on Rachel and the Republic this week. Rachel Parker, thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right, thank you. And I want to situate this in the broader context here, because this has been a tremendously vicious election. The narrative surrounding Donald Trump, and again, I'm not having this discussion in a way that pretends that I can vote for him. I'm a Canadian. I'm an interceptor of American politics right now, or an interloper, I guess. But this does matter, and this is meaningful. And we're seeing a lot of that same hatred and anger and venom and uncivility on both sides of the border. Michele Bachmann is a former Republican presidential candidate herself, sought the party nomination in 2012 and served for many years in Congress as a Republican representative. And she returns to the show now. Michele, thank you so much for coming on. Good to speak to you again.
Andrew, good to see you today too.
You have seen, you've met Donald Trump and you know him quite well, and you obviously know American politics quite well, and you know the symbolism of it. So when is that an image that surprises you given what happened and how you'd expect him to respond?
Yes, it is. The genius of Donald Trump, if people aren't aware of that, what is unique about this man is the fact that he doesn't see any obstacle. If there is an obstacle in his path, he goes around, he goes underneath, he goes over, he figures a way to get to what it is that he wants to do, especially in this election cycle. You've never seen more curveballs thrown at any candidate than what's been thrown at Donald Trump, including this. So his gut instincts are amazing. His gut instinct to immediately go straight down was an excellent move, but then also his gut instinct was to stand up and communicate to America. Because if you want to understand Donald Trump, he's a John Wayne American. If people remember back to John Wayne movies, that's really the kind of guy that Donald Trump is. Very optimistic, loves the country, believes that our country can do anything if we put our mind to it. He's a very decent man, and he wants a very decent country, and he's a continual fighter. So it was what we saw when he was shouting. He was angry, but he was angry at what was happening. And when he shouted, "Fight, fight, fight," that was from his heart. And I read an article this morning. He was responding to people over the weekend after he'd been seen by the doctors at the hospital in Pennsylvania, that he wanted to stay. He wanted to stay, and he wanted to speak to the audience. That's very indicative of who Donald Trump is. He has dragon energy like nobody I've ever seen. He has incredible stamina, incredible energy. He's older than I am, but his body is a lot younger than mine. He's just a very impressive individual.
Political violence in the United States is not, I would say it's not even all that rare. And it's been directed against politicians on the left and the right. You've Gabby Giffords, you have Steve Scalise, you have Ronald Reagan, you have all of this, Abraham Lincoln. I mean, this is a longstanding part of American politics, sadly. And I'm wondering whether this was outside of that, whether this was something unique. And what I mean by that is that the temperature in politics has seemed a lot higher in the last 8 years than it has been, even in that. I mean, the context of Reagan and the attempted assassination against him was a heck of a lot different than this attempt on Donald Trump's life.
No, I think you're right about that. And that's because what we've been seeing in the United States is a coup of our culture, a coup, a takeover, if you will, of our public schools, of our culture, of our corporate culture in the United States. And so we've gone from traditional America, thinking of loving our country, loving what our country stands for, loving the ability of people being able to start their own businesses and keep the money that they make, and people all being held to the same standard under the law, enforcement of the law. That way of life has been completely upended in the last probably 10 years. It's been upended. And we live in a country in America that we no longer recognize. Part of that is the political revolution that we see primarily coming through one particular party. That's the Democrat Party in the United States. And it seems that they've embraced a revolutionary attitude toward politics, where it's winner take all, that we can never lose an election, that everything is about holding on to the power base. It's very unusual from politics typically in the United States. And it's moving the United States toward a direction, like I said, that we no longer recognize. The open borders, for instance, and the out of control spending that we've never seen before. Really, it's like the United States is in a car going 80 miles an hour heading directly at a brick wall, and there's no brakes. That's really what's been happening in our country. People are reacting to that. They want America back, the happy America that we all knew before, the achieving America where we're not ashamed of what our country is. And so I think that thinking, that coup thinking, has got us into the trouble. And there's too many oddballs that have been calling actually for violence, including the president of the United States, Joe Biden, on Monday called for putting Trump in a bullseye. That's a significant statement. And it isn't just that. In the last 2 weeks, since the United States Supreme Court issued its decision on the immunity ruling for the presidents, there's been daily calls for the assassination of the president of the United States. If you read American press, it's daily calls for assassination, including the famous actress Bette Midler. She had made calls for, in fact, over the weekend, Jack Black, who has a rock band in Australia, one of his bandmates shouted out from the stage, "You better have better aim next time." And one of the staffers for the Democrat member of Congress who ran the January 6th committee, his staffer said, "Hey, why didn't you get shooting lessons?" So, I mean, these kind of comments are still going out after the attempt on the president's life. And I'm sure your listeners are well aware that President Trump literally was a fraction of a second away from death. This was meant to be a kill shot. And he looked to his right. He looked over his right shoulder at a chart regarding the numbers on illegal aliens coming into the United States. Only because he turned his head did the shot just take off a part of his ear instead of going into his brain. It was meant for his brain. It was meant to take him out. So this was a death shot. But probably the thing that everyone is talking about today, Andrew, is the fact that this was the most colossal fail from our Secret Service.
Yes.
I've had Secret Service protection. When I ran for president of the United States in 2012, I had President George W. Bush do fundraisers for me. I saw what that practice was like on the inside. And I'm telling you, there is literally no way security would miss the most obvious site on that whole campus to shoot from. It was very close, about 130 yards away, and it wasn't covered or protected at all. And for 3 minutes, people were getting the attention of Secret Service to tell them
Oh, we lost Michele for a moment. We'll hopefully get Michele back in a second here. But Sean, if you could, while we get Congressman Bachmann back on, if you could put that map back up there. This is incredibly important, and it's a little bit small, but I wanted to have a very wide image. So in the middle of the screen at the top, you see three buildings beside each other. And just below those, in front of those, is a photo of Donald Trump. That's where the Trump stage was set up. That's where the stage was set up. To the left of that, the red dot, that is where the sniper was. If you were to have no idea how to orchestrate a presidential assassination, and you were to know that Trump was going to be speaking in that spot, and you were going to look at this whole area, what is the most logical building that you would get onto? It's the closest one. It is literally the closest building to the stage, except for the three immediately behind the stage. And that is so incredibly important here, because how could you not look at that building? How could you not have someone standing on that building? How could you not have your own snipers on that building looking to the right of the stage? They had snipers behind the stage on those three building tops, but they did not have them, apparently, on the one that the sniper who took out or attempted to take out Donald Trump did, and who took out a beloved Pennsylvania fire chief who was in the bleachers behind Donald Trump. Like, this was absolutely a security failing. And I'm always the one telling people to not get conspiratorial. I'm always the one telling people, no, don't start going down this road of thinking that everything is a conspiracy. But I will be perfectly candid in saying that I have a lot of questions about this. I think it's entirely possible that this was a lone wolf gunman, a mentally unhinged gunman, a guy consumed by political hatred, consumed by something else. It's possible that that was the case, but how does a 20-year-old kid manage to exploit a security vulnerability of this nature without presumably knowing what he's doing? And more importantly, why is that security vulnerability there in the first place? Why is that security vulnerability there? Why does it exist? And that is a question that will take, I suspect, a great deal of time to answer. We have Michele Bachmann back, and I just want to spend just another moment with her here. Thank you for coming back, Michele. What is your read on this? Is your read that this couldn't just be basic government incompetence?
Well, that's always a factor, basic government incompetence. But I think people are worried that this may be more sinister, because clearly there are advanced men that do all of the work. Then this was the number one location that you would shoot from. It was the direct line of sight. It would offer the best kill shot. And so it's impossible to believe that it wasn't covered. But the other thing is, you had snipers who were looking directly at that area, who had the gun on him. And there's a report today that the fellow who had the gun on the shooter had it sighted on him for 3 minutes, that he had asked for permission to take this fellow out, and he wasn't given permission. Now, that hasn't been verified, but that's been all over the place. And again, it wasn't just one person who saw the shooter up there. There were a lot of people that saw the shooter. They were pointing at the shooter. They had the attention of the Secret Service. They had the attention of the local police, and a local policeman had time to put a ladder. He had the time to put the ladder up against the building and climb up. And then the shooter pointed his gun at the local policeman. He ducked and he went down. So had the local policeman stayed there, pulled his gun out, or maybe he would have been killed himself. Clearly at that point, I think the snipers would have taken out the shooter and they wouldn't have shot at President Trump. But be that as it may, I mean, when you think about this 50-year-old fireman who was killed, he was in the bleachers behind President Trump, and 2 other people were severely injured as well. So this is as big as it gets, this assassination attempt against the president. And so it isn't that there's no equivalency here about the rhetoric. Rhetoric is strong on both political parties, Republican, Democrat, but the calls for assassination, the calls for violence have almost been exclusively coming from the Democrat Party. They need to own that. They need to apologize for it. They need to renounce that. And then at this point, I think there's a lot of reluctance to really trust the Secret Service or trust the FBI at this point. They're the ones conducting the investigation. And as of this morning, they're telling the world that they aren't able to open the cell phone of the 20-year-old. Who believes that? That they don't have the ability to open up that cell phone. So there are so many things that don't add up right now. And so a lot will unfold.
Michele Bachmann, thank you so much for coming on today. I know it's a busy week in your country, so I appreciate your insights and time very much.
Thanks again, Andrew. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Likewise, Michele. Michele Bachmann, former candidate for the Republican presidential nomination back in 2012, also former congresswoman. And I would just say on top of this, and let's actually put up that map again, if you don't mind, Sean, because this is... I am not a tactical expert. I am not military. I am not law enforcement. But if I were putting myself in the mind of someone who wanted to do something bad to a guy that was going to be standing exactly where Trump is marked right there in these three buildings, and you're not trying to be stealthy. You're not trying to be sleuthy. You're not an expert. You're not necessarily a trained shooter. The closest building is the one with that red dot. That was the one on which this 20-year-old gunman was situated. It is absolutely a security failing. The fact that someone has not been fired over this already, I find to be astonishing. And I just want to share a video, Michele Bachmann alluded to this, of people that had been trying to alert law enforcement about this guy with a gun on the roof. Let's roll that clip.
We noticed a guy crawling, bear crawling up the roof of the building beside us, 50 feet away from us. So we're standing there, we're pointing at the guy crawling up the roof.
And he had a gun, right?
He had a rifle.
A rifle.
We could clearly see him with a rifle. Absolutely. We're pointing at him. The police are down there running around on the ground. We're like, hey, man, there's a guy on the roof with a rifle. And the police are like, huh, what? Like they didn't know what was going on. We're like, hey, right here on the roof. We can see him from right here. We see him. He's crawling. And next thing you know, I'm thinking to myself, why is Trump still speaking? Why have they not pulled him off the stage? I'm standing there pointing at him for, 2-3 minutes. Secret Service is looking at us from the top of the barn. I'm pointing at that roof, just standing there like this. And next thing you know, 5 shots ring out.
So you're certain that the shots came from that guy on the roof?
100%. 100%.
And he was up there for a couple of minutes.
He was up there.
You saw him up there for a couple of minutes.
Absolutely. At least 3 to 4 minutes.
And you were telling the police and the Secret Service.
We were telling the police. We were pointing at him for the Secret Service, who were looking at us from the top of the barn. They were looking at us the whole time when we were standing by that tree.
Could they see
binoculars?
Could they see him?
Probably not, because the roof, the way the slope went, he was behind where they could see. But why is there not Secret Service on all of these roofs here? I mean, this is not a big place.
Yeah, that's a fair question. And when he said that, I mean, that clip was one of the first Eyewitness interviews to start circulating, and good on BBC for getting it. The thought that I had is, okay, you can't necessarily picture the place. And then you find out where it is. You look at it on a map and you see the realization that I concluded, that I shared with you, of how few buildings there are in this area. We're not talking about some urban environment where you've got rooftop upon rooftop upon rooftop, windows going up 50 stories. This is an easy area to secure, it seems like, and other security experts have said. And that story that gentleman told BBC, it sounds, there's no way it could possibly be accurate. Well, doesn't footage emerge showing pretty much exactly what he just described?
If he was doing his job, I wouldn't even be doing this. I'd be at some beautiful places, the gorgeous ocean, the Mediterranean.
Look, they're all pointing.
The Atlantic, maybe the Pacific.
Yeah, someone's on top of the roof. Look. There he is right there. Right there, see him? He's laying down. See him?
Yeah, he's laying down.
Instead, I'm here with you fighting cartel to get a senator.
What's happening?
And to make sure we take back the White House, because if we do, we're going to make America better than ever before. We're going to make it.
Yeah, look. There he is.
Easy, because we have millions and millions of people in our country that shouldn't be here. Dangerous people. Criminals. We have criminals.
He's
we
on
have
the roof. He's
drug dealers. We have people that should not be here.
Right on the roof.
It's much tougher than it happens.
He went right on the roof again.
That was 52 seconds of people yelling, he's on the roof, pointing, flagging down officers. That was, I believe, 2 or 3 minutes before the first shot rang out. Now, again, it's difficult to make things happen in real time, but the fact that a police officer couldn't immediately radio his superior and say, we've got a gunman, and have Trump removed from that stage is absolutely astonishing. I get it takes time to find the guy, to line up the shot, but when you've got credible reports that there is a gunman, get the president, the former president, out of the shot. Get him out of the line of fire. Get him out of the room, out of the building, out of the town, out of the county. Just get him in that car and go. It's a security failing. I don't want to pretend that I am an expert on all things security, but we're not even talking about that. And don't let anyone tell you that, oh, well, all these armchair Monday morning quarterbacks don't know what they're talking about, because we're talking about just fundamental common sense here. And the so-called experts lose their right to claim the moral high ground when the former president of the United States, a man under Secret Service protection, gets shot. They lose the moral high ground to start wagging their fingers at other people that start pointing out the holes in what happened there. And I should say there's been a tremendous, I would say relatively unanimous response from Canadian political leaders, from American political leaders. The folks that have been reveling in his death are coming from academia, they're coming from social media, from the entertainment world. But I was glad that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, Pierre Poilievre, Yves-François Blanchet, they all were shared in their condemnation of this. Justin Trudeau even spoke to Donald Trump this weekend. I think there's probably a realization there that this guy is going to win the election, and I thought it looked that way even before what happened this past weekend. But I want to highlight Pierre Poilievre's response in particular here, because Poilievre said the following. He said, on X, I condemn in the strongest of terms the attempted murder of former President Trump today. I am relieved he is safe. My prayers are with other innocent people harmed or killed by this heinous act. I am also happy that the suspected shooter is dead. Democracy must prevail. Now, that is a sentiment you don't get often, reveling in the death of bad people. It's one that most people cheered for. Most people said, yeah, absolutely, I'm happy the guy who tried to kill a president is dead. It's something that people in other countries don't have the issues with. When the United States launched a drone strike that took out that commander, Solomon, what's his name? Solomon, the Iranian, the IRGC commander. I forget his full name. Soleimani, that's it. When that happened, lots of Iranian dissidents were cheering for his death. When Fidel Castro died, all of the ex-Cubans or Cubanos in Miami and elsewhere around North America were cheering for it. So there are people that have been very much okay with this. But in Canada, there was a lot of pearl clutching about this. You had Andrew Coyne in the Globe and Mail getting particularly offended. Joel Harden, the NDP guy in the Ontario NDP MP that faked getting attacked when he was hit by his own megaphone in the head, that guy. What happened, though, is that all of these folks were getting mad at Poilievre for being happy that a guy is dead. Now, what was fascinating there is, look, I'm a Christian. I don't revel in people's death. I don't revel in people's suffering or misery. I don't certainly share any sense of loss or unhappiness about it. Do I celebrate it? Not necessarily, but I'm certainly not offended by it. I'm not offended by people such as Pierre Poilievre saying that they're glad the guy is dead. And I find the pearl clutching on this to be remarkable. All of these folks that are just, I think it's just because it's Donald Trump. It's just because it's Donald Trump. They find it difficult to revel in the fact that this stopped. And I think that says a great deal about them and their perspective on this. And I know that there's going to be a lot more that comes out about this in the coming days and in the coming weeks. But I'll just to put a fine point on this, say that I am glad this failed, but it was not without casualty. It was not at all without casualty. And I am so sad when I've seen the photos of the gentleman, 50 years old, Corey, his last name, I don't want to butcher it, but he was a fire chief and had a young family, and his crime was sitting in the bleachers to hear Donald Trump speak. And that got him executed by a man who's now dead. by 20-year-old Thomas Crooks, who we'll learn more about. Again, there's a lot that's weird about it. You had people from his high school saying he was a terrible shot and didn't make the school rifle team. He doesn't seem to have any online footprint. And again, how did he get onto a building, and why was that building unsecure? These are all questions I hope we get answers to. Just because this bullet only grazed Donald Trump's ear does not mean that this was not a shot heard around the world. So we'll put this to bed for this particular show. As I said, I'm sure we'll revisit it in the future, but I do want to bring in our good friend, Kris Sims. She is the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. No natural segue from that to this, Kris, but I know you're a news hound as well. So you were probably glued to your television and Twitter just like I was on the weekend, weren't you?
Oh, yeah. We were just coming back. My kids and I were just coming back from a car show here in Lethbridge, and my daughter, she's trained to check Twitter all the time now for us, which is great. And she said, Mama, somebody shot President Trump. I had to pull over because that was pretty surprising. And then, yeah, needless to say, I was glued to the news and to the phone. So the Taxpayers Federation obviously doesn't have a comment on this, but just personally, it's pretty gripping. If I could recommend two things to people, and you probably will agree, thank goodness for alternative media. Thank goodness for citizen journalists, because there's an awful lot of information we're getting there from the scene, needs to be verified. But as a journalist, thank goodness for independent journalism. And two, as a history buff, I encourage everybody to learn about what happened in the 1960s in the United States. Like, for real. A lot of people think they know, or they might have heard something, and they might have seen the footage, the Zapruder footage of JFK. That's the start of it. Read more about it. Read about JFK, read about what happened with Martin Luther King, and read about what happened with RFK. So there's a lot of echoes happening here right now. And so just for their own understanding, I don't care what party they vote for, just for their own understanding of what's going on in that country that's so near and dear to us and so important. Those were the two main takeaways I had.
Yeah, and that's very fair. And to bring things back into a Canadian context, something that seems so trivial by comparison, but is relevant to a great many Canadians, myself included, we are still dealing with the carbon tax. And we are still dealing with this, and the government is still trying to put that fine point and the happy spin on it, the sunny ways spin. This was the tweet that Justin Trudeau put out today, telling Canadians, check your bank account. Now, that is a very dangerous thing for Justin Trudeau to ask Canadians to do, because I think most Canadians have checked their bank accounts and find that after 9 years of his government, there's a lot less in it than there otherwise would have been, and certainly than there was before. But what he's talking about there is the rollout of the so-called carbon tax rebate, which they say will make things better for 8 out of 10 Canadians. You're actually profiting from the carbon tax. Don't you know? It's not making you spend more money on gas and groceries. You're coming out ahead. It doesn't seem to be something that Canadians are buying, which is why the government forced banks on direct deposit to write in Canada carbon rebate. Is it going to work, Kris?
No. And I hadn't seen that tweet yet. And you putting up a picture of Prime Minister Trudeau with him telling you to check your bank account. Why, Prime Minister?
Agree. And Poilievre should just retweet it and say, yes, Canadians, please do. Check your bank accounts.
Please do, because they need to know, did he freeze their bank account? I don't know. Maybe they said something or donated something or tweeted something that they didn't like. Of course, I'm referencing back to the terrible time that they invoked the Emergencies Act on people, which thankfully a federal court judge said, you know what, that was totally out of your ballpark and you shouldn't have done so. The Canadian Constitution Foundation, as you know, did great work on that. And you've done very good work on that yourself. So that's pretty chilling for him to say, check your bank accounts. No, how about you never mention my bank account again, Prime Minister? But all this said, this is again one of those ridiculous things where the government, especially led by Prime Minister Trudeau in this context, thinks that they can just pull the wool over people's eyes and say, trust us. If you give us a $20 bill, we will magically increase its value and give you back $50. No strings attached, no cost to you. That defies common sense. Any reasonably intelligent person understands that's not how government works. It is going to always cost you money. And it is. It costs around $200 million just to administer the carbon tax. Like, those are all taxpayer dollars too. And people understand that when they're filling up their minivan or their pickup truck, or, winter will be here again, sorry, when they're paying $400 extra over the winter for their natural gas or propane, that they're paying through the nose. They know they're not getting more than they pay back. And the parliamentary budget officer has come out repeatedly and said that's the case, that they're out money. So it's just weird that he's still clinging to this magical idea of but the rebates.
And it's particularly cynical for the government to force the banks to label these things a certain way, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because again, it's bigfooting, right? It's getting in there with a private institution and saying you must label it this way. Like, people don't like that. They don't like, no matter what political party they're with, they usually don't like the idea of the government being able to tell the banks to do something like that. You have to label it like this. Now, I'm reading your excellent book. Sorry, shameless plug, but I'm reading your excellent book.
Plug away.
Right? So the politics, I understand the politics of saying, you know what, if you're sending out, I forget what this called, child benefit. Back when I was a kid, they used to call them the baby bonus. But if you're sending it out by paper check, people notice it more, right? And all politicians have done this before. They've mostly gone to direct deposit now, but there's good retail politicians know to send those things out in a paper check with your name on it and money on it. But here is one step further, because that's just you reading it. You're choosing to read it. This is one step further because the government is telling the banks to make it show up in a certain way, and then getting up in your Twitter feed and in your grill saying, hey, by the way, everybody, check your bank account. Like, ew, they're not doing communications very well lately at all.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's basically just one step shy of a little memo line on it that says "enjoy, comma, your friend Justin." Like it's the kind of thing that you're right. All parties do it. The part of the book that you're referencing there is when Pierre Poilievre was the ESDC minister and the Conservatives were increasing the child tax credit. Poilievre was like doing a photo op as the checks were coming off the printing press in Winnipeg, and he's saying, let's put it out by check so that they have to hold it and deposit it and all of that. But my bigger issue is the gaslighting on the payment itself, is that there's not a single person in this country that believes that they are making money off of the carbon tax. And again, if the carbon tax were just paying people, it wouldn't be necessary.
Yes, exactly. And this is the funny thing about the carbon tax, is that no matter which angle you come at it from, it always blows up. Like, this is not the Death Star. There's not only one route in and one way to get rid of this thing. Any way you turn this thing around, it doesn't make any sense. So let's think of it this way. Let's say that somehow Canada was able to reduce global emissions to the effect that people want it to. That's not possible because we only emit about 1.5%. But let's say for argument's sake, we could. How are you going to do that? Okay, let's have a carbon tax. Why would the carbon tax work? Oh, because it makes that stuff so expensive, it punishes people and they pull their fingies away from the hot stove and they won't do it. If that isn't the financial punishment attached to it, if it's going to give them more money by paying more carbon tax, that completely defeats their argument. Like, again, and it's also shown true by the fact that they gave largely Atlantic Canada a carve-out, a 3-year carve-out, my friend, on home heating oil. Why'd they do that? Because it was a financial hardship to pay the carbon tax on home heating oil. Duh. But they're still clinging on to this strange little piece of comms of you get more money than you pay back. You don't. They should just, free communications advice, they should drop that, because it's way too easy to fight them on it.
Kris Sims, the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. We will talk to you next Monday.
You betcha.
All right. Thanks very much, Kris. That does it for us for today. We will be back tomorrow. No, sorry, I'm off tomorrow, but I'll be back on Wednesday with more of Canada's most irreverent talk show. This is the Andrew Lawton Show on True North. Thank you. God bless, and good day to you all.
Thanks for listening to the Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.